welcome everyone to our, and thank you for attending this remembrance to honor the lives that were needlessly taken from us 24 years ago. We do have a timer set, and you will hear some chimes as they come up. So if you're up here speaking and it starts to make some noise, I'm going to ask you to stop. And that is when the first plane struck the first building. And we're going to do a little ceremony, a moment of silence at that point in time. So we're going to try and make this flow, but we'll see how things go. So this will be my last 9/11 remembrance ceremony as a fire chief. And I really thought hard about what I wanted to say today. You know, do I get sappy? Do I get angry? You know, do I cry? Do I smile? You know, all of us of a certain age remember what we were doing, where we were when we learned of this tragic incident. It's funny, I think back and I can remember when I first started in the fire service, the guys would tell me they remembered what happened and what they were doing when Kennedy was shot. I said, I was 3. I don't remember what I was doing. But this I remember very specifically. So what I decided to do was to share my memories of what that day was in the days after, and then to share some of my thoughts, my hopes for the future. And I mentioned earlier to some people that I like to talk and I can't help it. I'm Irish, Italian, and I'm old. So if I talk too much, I apologize, but I'll give it a shot. So 24 years ago this morning, right around now, a little bit earlier, I was standing on the front steps of the New Hampshire Fire Academy. I was a very new assistant chief, only a month or two. And I was there assisting with the statewide testing for new firefighters. And I was there, I was checking people in, making sure they were wearing the proper clothing, making sure they didn't have a calculator with them, making sure they didn't have one of those newfangled cell phones with them that they could call and get the answers for as they were taking the test. And as I'm standing there, a close friend of mine came by and he said, hey, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. And the first thing, my first reaction was, man, that's not going to be very fun to go to. That's going to be a horrible incident. Right? And as I'm greeting the candidates, I'm listening to them and they're like, wow, that sounds like it would be a really cool call to go to. So this is the difference between someone who's been there and someone who hasn't, right? So a short time later, I found myself down in the cafeteria. And that's where the candidates would wait for their results. It was myself and a bunch of other officers and all the candidates and firefighters, and we watched that first building collapse. You're beeping. And somebody made a comment, my God, how many guys did we just lose? And the word we was used because we, first responders, police, fire, EMS, DPW, which, yes, those are first responders, our dispatchers. We're a big family. Sometimes we hate each other, sometimes we fight. We're like kids, but we always have each other's back. So that's why the word we was used. And unlike the short time earlier when we first heard the accident happen and I said I don't want to go there, now my thoughts are, my God, I got to get there. You know, we need to go down there and help. And then people in hushed tones started talking about how many people we may have lost. I can tell you they weren't anywhere close in their estimates. Then my phone rang and it was my chief and he says, Dave, I'll let you finish out the day, but you will be back here tomorrow. You can't go back and help tomorrow because I want you here. I want all hands on deck. And the words he used was, just in case things explode. An interesting choice of words, right? So then as I'm checking in the second rounds of candidates, I look over and I see a group of young firefighters and they're crying. And we all knew it was emotional, but, you know, they're just there to check in and they're crying. And I'm like, you know, what's going on? And they were talking to the guy that was in charge of the testing procedure. And I can see him talking to him and yeah. So he walks by me. I said, Steve, what's going on? He says, those are all FDNY guys. Said they decided they wanted to get out of the city. They wanted to come back to New Hampshire. A lot of them were from New Hampshire originally. They wanted to get away from the craziness of the city, and they wanted to come up here. Some of them had swapped off the shift to do so, to come up and take the test. And they were asking, is it possible to change the testing time? Is it possible that we can get in now and test? Now, you understand, any fire, police, any of this testing is very regimented. This is when we do it, this is how we do it. I can tell you that went out the window. We said, you bet you can. We got him in there. We got him testing, we got him out. One thing I vividly remember about that day and the days after is when they showed the videos of Ground Zero. And you heard that beeping sound. And nobody knew what that beeping sound was. The firefighters knew what it was. But people said, what is that sound? Is that the fire alarm going on? What is that? Well, that sound is the personal safety devices that the firefighters wore. And those devices are meant to sound when a firefighter is motionless for a period of time. So there was no question in our mind that many of our brothers and sisters weren't going home that day, because we knew what that meant. So in the days that followed, station security increased tenfold. Like I tell you, doors were locked, bay doors were shut down, no one could come in, staffing was increased. Everyone was on edge. Firefighters and officers were torn between racing down to New York City to help or staying to protect the communities we were sworn to protect. Because we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know if there was something was going to happen at our facility. I remember telling my wife, who we just had our 37th anniversary, and I remember telling her, hey honey, if they call, nothing is going to stop me from going. Well, they never called. And they never called because so many people showed up to help that they were inundated and they just couldn't even control who came. And we had our own responsibilities. We had to take care of what was happening with us. But something really interesting did happen in the days that followed. So crews that in the past, literally the previous week, would have been out shopping with a truck and would have been scorned or, well, it must be nice to get paid to go shopping for dinner. We're now having people buying their food for them. We're now having people coming up and hugging them and saying, thank you for everything you do. I remember on several occasions I was driving my department car through a drive-through to get a coffee. Trust me, it was coffee. It wasn't, something I wasn't supposed to get. And I'd go to pay and they say, no, they already got it. And they said to say thank you. Right? It was just amazing. We got gifts, we got meals. Chief, I'm sure that you got tons of food and tons of stuff that was delivered, and I know they did here. And it was just amazing. But as often happens with tragedies, memories fade. Other things take priority and people forget. However, we must never forget what happened on that fateful day. But don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about remembering the horrible terrorist attack. We can't forget that. I'm not talking about harboring hate for others. There's just way too much hate going on right now. We need to stop that. I'm also not referring to the anger and the rage we all felt that day and the months after against other people. That's not what I'm talking about. My hope is that in the future we can remember the courage of the passengers in the airplane over Shanksville, the bravery of the people in the towers who helped others escape without thinking of their own survival, the members of the military personnel in the Pentagon who made every effort to just save one more life, the police, the fire, the EMS personnel who didn't question their orders. They just did their jobs. And the ones who had to give those orders, we need to remember them too, because when you give orders and you're sending someone into a place, they're not going to come out of it. It's not that easy. And of course, those who made the ultimate sacrifice that day. But we must not forget those who have made the ultimate sacrifice since that day from 9/11 related cancer. They continue to pass away to this day. It's a terrible thing. So my hope is we can remember the love we felt for each other and for our country at that time. The way we felt when someone looked at us and said, thank you for what you do, and they really meant it. The way we supported each other and didn't let our differences separate us. The pride we had in ourselves and our chosen profession, that is what we must never forget and what we must always remember. Thank you. Chief Griffin.
Good morning. Evidently, the chief and I go to the same speechwriter. Yeah, as I said, that never forget is a simple phrase that became a promise after September 11th, 2001. A promise to honor those we lost, to remember the bravery shown, and to pass down the lessons of that day to future generations. I'm so grateful that we're all here and that the fire department organized this today and invited us over. It's a small gathering, but it's an important moment that we do remember. I think it's kind of ironic that our fire department is on a couple calls right now, and it's just work goes on, people need our help, and we respond. Only 5 current Northborough police officers were actively serving as police officers on September 11th. Lieutenant Ajamoritis, Lieutenant Griffin, who's here, Officer Ajamoritis, Officer Martin, and myself. For the rest of our department, 9/11 is something they were too young to truly remember. Officers Ryan Clark, Dan Martin, and Connor Henry were 5 years old. Officers Corinne Marchetta, Spencer Fuller, James Anderson, and Jake Tondell were 2. Matt York and Officer Ferreira were 1. Dispatcher Alyssa Wooster was 2 months old. And Officer Hunter Luby, our baby, wasn't even born yet. It's up to us, who do remember that day, to educate and share our experience with the younger generation so that we never forget. Much like our parents told us where they were when President Kennedy was assassinated, or our grandparents shared their memories of Pearl Harbor, we now have the responsibility to keep the story of 9/11 alive. I can't believe I'll tell just a personal story as to where I was and my memories of that day. And I really can't believe it was 24 years ago. It doesn't seem that long ago. Okay. I remember just getting off my midnight shift as a young patrol officer. It was a beautiful fall morning just like this. I do remember what a beautiful day it was. I was excited. I was going on my weekends off. I was planning to see my girlfriend, who's now my wife, later that night. I stopped by my parents' house to check in and say hello, and that's where the horrific event started to unfold while I was at their house. For reasons I still don't... Thank you. For reasons I still don't fully understand, in the middle of all of this news, I decided to go get a haircut. Maybe it was my way of trying to escape the reality of what I was watching. I remember driving down South Street, heading towards Westborough, and listening to the radio announcer state that Tower 1 had fallen. It didn't seem real. It felt like a dream to me. It couldn't happen. Later on, I walked into Phil's barbershop at the Rotary in Westborough right as Tower 2 fell down. How do I remember all of those things? I have no idea, but it's ever etched in my head. That was a moment I'll never forget, and I know each of us who lived through it has a story like that, where we were, what we felt, and how the world seemed to stop at that moment. But as powerful as the memory of that day is the memory that has always stayed with me is the day after. On September 12th, the entire country seemed to come together. As the chief stated, strangers were kinder to one another. People flew the American flags from their homes, in their cars, their businesses. You couldn't buy a flag. You couldn't find a flag anywhere. People lined the streets to donate blood. Firefighters and police officers and paramedics were thanked everywhere they went. Neighbors checked on neighbors. Out of tragedy came a reminder of who we are at our best. We're caring, we're generous, and we were united. Never forget doesn't just mean remembering the horror of the day. It also means remembering the strength, the unity, and the kindness that followed. So today, as we gather 24 years later, let us honor the lives that were lost, the heroes who ran towards danger, in the spirit of unity that lifted us up in the days that followed. And let us do our part to carry the spirit forward, not just on anniversaries like this, but every day. Thank you.
If anybody hears the bells go off, it's set for all the timelines throughout the day. So if you hear future bells, those are the other events.
Thank you very much, Chief. Select Board Member Tejan's going to say a few words for us now.
Thanks everybody for coming. Those are two tough speeches to follow, so I'll do my best. Also, given the events of yesterday, it should go without saying, but I just felt like I was obligated to say, political violence is never acceptable. And I think we all send our condolences to Charlie Kirk, his family, his wife, and his children, and his fans and people who like listening to his commentary. We're all here because it's important, as it said, and it kind of maybe sounds cliche to never forget, but to never forget the horror, the bravery, and the sacrifice 24 years ago this morning. The victims of that day were everyday Americans in their offices at the World Trade Center, at the Pentagon, routine flights, working a shift at the firehouse or police precinct. Just remembering where I was that day, I was a college freshman at Rutgers in New Jersey. And other than the horrible images on TV and what was going on around you, I remember you could smell the fire in the air, you could see it. And I remember the sound of fighter jets overhead. And just the thought that war had come to America and we were living through it, something that you'd only read in a history book, but seemed to be happening right then. The men and women here in uniform know all too well you never know what that next call will be. And for 343 members of the New York City Fire Department, 23 members of the New York City Police Department, and 37 members of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Police Department, that September morning would be their end of watch, their last call, last alarm. Today, many have no firsthand memory of 9/11. One day it may be a distant memory. Those who survived and lived through it will be few and far between, kind of how we may think of Pearl Harbor today. But for right now, let us remember, let us never forget all 2,977 people killed on September 11th, 2001. All those who passed and suffered from illness and toxic exposure, and all those who served to bring justice to the terrorists responsible. God bless them all, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate those words. We're going to have Deputy Chief of Spades is going to come up and he's going to take us through the timeline of what happened that day.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for coming. To echo some of the statements, the world that we live in right now which is temporary, we can change, is very different than September 12th. Probably my favorite memory of my life in the United States as American. And I echo their statements that we need to do better. I would also like to, I always say at these events, there was one event that I went to in New York where they said, never forget became that mantra to remember. But they said it's better to always remember, not just never forget, always remember. It's more of an active event. So the timelines of this day. At 8:46 a.m. on a beautiful blue sky day, very similar to today, American Airlines Flight 11, which left from Boston's Logan Airport, bound for Los Angeles, California, crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175, also which left from Boston's Logan Airport for Los Angeles, California, crashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Suddenly it became clear that these were deliberate acts of violence and death and destruction, terrorism. Many civilian lives were lost, and hundreds of firefighters and police officers and paramedics made the supreme sacrifice of running into those buildings to rescue their fellow citizens. As the morning went on, at 9:38 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, exponentially increasing our fear that our nation, not just New York City, was under attack. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses, plummeting to the streets below, an image burned into our history. Through the power of heroism of average Americans and their selfless act to lay down their lives for their fellow citizens, at 10:10 a.m., Flight 93 crashes into a barren field in the small town of Shanksville, Pennsylvania. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses, forever changing the Manhattan skyline. Amazingly, in large part due to military evacuation planning after the failed attacks of the World Trade Center in 1993, no recorded civilian lives were lost below the levels of impact. The attacks finally ended, but this was just the beginning of a long road of rescue, recovery, and healing of our nation. God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Deputy. Did you get rid of my stuff? Yeah. That's okay. So I take a second and thank you all for coming today. As I said earlier, this will be my last as a fire chief, but it will never be my last time to remember what happened. It's funny, the deputy mentioned 93, and I had completely forgot about that. And I was a new lieutenant at that time, and I remember thinking, man, I want to be there. Man, how things change. If you could all stand and we'd do a prayer for unity. Almighty and eternal God, you have called all people to be members of one another and to lift their spirits to you as Father. You alone are the source of our confidence, our strength, and our hope during these perilous times. Strike from our hearts a national righteousness that causes hatred between and division between persons and countries. Teach us to love one another as you have loved us. Concentrate each of us anew that in our dealings with one another, with other nations, we may act justly, love mercifully, and walk humbly with you. Amen. Please sit down. So, just a few closing remarks. I think the other speakers, and I didn't realize Chief Griffin and I actually wrote this together, but our speeches were pretty darn close. But what does that tell you? That takes us back to that family statement I made, right? We all have this same passion, this same love. And I want to echo what Select Board Member Tijan said, that there is too much violence and too much hatred. There's no room for that. There's no room for political violence and political hatred. If we don't take care of each other, who the heck is going to do that? So please, always remember what happened. Always remember the heroes. Always remember the survivors, because they have to live with that for the rest of their lives as well. So thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day on this beautiful day. And maybe I'll come up next year and see you. Who knows? But thank you.